Welcome to Employee Termination Tips. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And this particular video is directed at salaried employees in Canada who've been terminated, in the sense of, have you been fully paid what you were due? And we're not just talking about salary, we're talking about all the payments that you were entitled to, that you earned, and the law requires you to have been paid. And what we're looking into is seeing whether or not you have fully reviewed your complete pay as against what the governing employment standards legislation requires you to have been paid and what you have earned. And not only have most people not done so, but far too many employers have not done so also. And this is the reason why people can continue to have worked on salary, believing that they've been fully paid and not knowing any better, because neither the employer nor the employee does anything about it, knows anything about it, or deals with it. And why is that? We're going to tackle 7 points as to why you might not have been fully paid on your salary. Number 1, employers are overly reliant on foreign payroll software that seems to only address Canadian and provincial tax obligations and little, if anything, more that is Canadian specific. Number 2, employers are overly reliant on hardworking and underpaid, underappreciated payroll staffs that are not necessarily trained in the law. They've understood the payroll systems and structures they've come up with, but they're not legally trained. They're not even accounting trained. Number 3, there really isn't any oversight or input from lawyers or accountants, with there seeming to be no true payroll specialists with a specific skill set to identify employee underpayments. Number 4, employers are focused on cutting costs, not on identifying underpayments to employees, such that if anything is identified, they instead look for an excuse not to pay it. Furthermore, given that the financial ramifications of these underpayments can be enormous for the employer to correct, the employer always finds themselves seeking to avoid making additional payments where there is some minutia of legal possibility, at least that they can argue, to not pay them. And especially if it's not brought up by the employee, but brought in internally, there's all the more incentive to not address it appropriately. Number 5, most salaried employees seek to protect their job while they're working, such that only upon their termination can they assess and challenge deficiencies. Yet, since too much focus is on their exit payments, primarily termination pay in lieu of notice and severance pay, this tends to be all too often overlooked. Number 6, it is actually quite complex, and far too often all the necessary information is not available or provided to the employee, even though there are specific requirements to provide it to the employee, such that these aspects of payroll and the potential for underpayment is not identified and not even dealt with. Number 7, most lawyers would appear to have little acumen for mathematics and computational methodologies, or have failed to interconnect these aspects with the law to identify the statutory discrepancies. So if they're simply focused on the termination pay in lieu of notice and severance pay aspect, and they're not going to go into the hard specifics of previous pay, oftentimes overthinking the aspects of statute of limitations and other considerations, you don't get into these areas. So instead, what happens is straightforward simplicity has resulted in considerable failures to identify and address underpayments to Canadian salaried employees. Nevertheless, when you've been terminated or fired from your job, it is important to not only look at termination pay in lieu of notice and severance pay with respect to your exit payments. Even as a salaried employee, you really should have a look, and you should have your lawyer have a look at whether or not all the payments that you were entitled to and that you earned during the course of your employment were paid to you. And if they were not, is there a legal basis upon which you should be able to attain those payments? Because these are payments that you have earned and you're entitled to by law. And what we're seeing is all too often, due to the complexity, simplicity is allowed to take over. And who suffers because of that? The employee. And who benefits? The employer. And you don't want to be one of those people who leaves their job, lost their job, been fired or terminated, and you leave money on the table that you are legally entitled to. That is your money, and that is money that you should be pursuing if it is there and it is owed to you in accordance with the law. Thank you.